Education is preparation for reparations.
Our next speaker is a member of the Secretariat for the All-party Parliamentary Group, and that is Onyekachi Wambu from Afford. Onyekachi.
Thank you. Thank you, Val. Good afternoon.
Use the podium if you'd like.
No, it's fine. I'll sit and make the presentation. Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. Greetings, and it's so good to be here with everybody. And this is a meeting that has been 30 years in the making since Bernie Grant launched the Afrikan Reparations movement here in the UK. We're here to consider the framing. What does reparations mean? What is the purpose of it? How should we approach this? And I wanted to just throw out a few ideas and a few dates. The OAU in 1993 called the conference on African reparations. So why did they do it in 1993? And it's very important to talk about why 1993 was significant and 92 earlier when action started around this. There's always been, since the first moment of attack and the trafficking, kidnapping and trafficking of enslaved Africans, there's always been resistance and calls for repair and calls for restitution. But 1993 also represents an important milestone. And it's a milestone that begins in 1452, just over 500 years before, when Pope Nicholas V issues a papal decree that says that it's okay for Europeans to reduce any Saracens and pagans and other unbelievers to perpetual slavery. He then issues another papal bull in 1455 to the same Alfonso, the King of Portugal, Alfonso V, extending to the Catholic nations of Europe, dominion over discovered lands all over the world. And they split the world in half. And since then, with that movement to the west, the movement south to Africa, and then the movement round the Cape, Europe becomes at the center of the world. And a hegemony is put in place, and ordinary, small European countries construct a global system that dominates the world. So if we're going to respond, we have to be responding to that system that was constructed or beginning to be constructed with those issues of those papal bulls. As we said, people began to resist immediately, and I've come up with some R's that might explain that journey of resistance and the different processes that we're going through, and perhaps we should also consider in this reparations conference about how we repair what has happened and how we resist and challenge that system that has been put in place. So why is 1993, fast forwarding, very important? Resistance happened in Haiti, we had battles to remove slavery in all the different locations in what I'm calling the African Atlantic world. The struggles that went on in Africa, a lot of things happened. Big heroes, as I said, Toussaint, big intellectuals, C.L.R. James, Padmore, a lot of people who were involved in this struggle. But 1993, we are at the end of an age of really important, that age of domination, that age of second-class citizenship, that age of codification of African inferiority, where European powers have either the strength, the arrogance, and the power to impose African inferiority in legal documents. And that ends with the freeing of South Africa, which is why we were so obsessed with getting rid of that final one globally. So in 1993, the African world starts looking back at the price, as James Baldwin used to say, that we paid for the ticket. And we see the reparations movements have begun. And those reparation movements, as I found it useful to discuss them in a number of hours. So the first hour was the hour of resistance. And the second hour is just recognizing what happened to us in those 400 years, in all the different locations in the African Atlantic. So the millions who died being transported across the Middle Passage. Some people say it's 2 million, other people say 20 million, but a lot of people pass. The Atlantic Ocean is an African graveyard. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for repair? Why is it that the powers that reduced the Atlantic to an African graveyard can commemorate in Park Lane the role of animals in war, but cannot put up a statue to the victims that created all of this that we exist in? So that hour of recognition is important because people get angry when you ask them to recognize what happened. How many dead? We started the Remembrance Day in 1995 to commemorate the dead. This country still can't bring itself to acknowledge, to recognize the dead. So that's the first hour of recognition. There's the hour of remembrance. There's the hour of restitution, because during those periods of attack and domination, our cultural artifacts were taken in the museums down the road. Our leaders were slain, and sometimes their heads were cut off and brought back as trophies. And they're in basements in various museums in this country. So can we return those artifacts? I'm particularly involved in a campaign called Return of the Icons to make sure that those ancestral remains and those artifacts are returned home. And some of our high-ranking African officials are still on display. Human remains on display in the British Museum. You go on the mummy floor. That's what that is, in case it hadn't occurred to you. Why is that happening in the 21st century? So there's the art of restitution of these cultural areas, and then there's the different arts of return. There's the art of reconnection. So some of these arts are about us and them, and how we make that connection and that engagement. And then the other arts are about ourselves and how we repair internally amongst ourselves. There was a massive breach in the African world between the continent and the diaspora, and we have to repair and reconnect. The Rastas of blessed memory have been in the forefront of that campaign of African remembrance and return and reconnection. And Burning Spear and all the rest sang about the importance of that work. So there's work that we have to do to reconnect. And then the final hours are about economic reconstruction, about what do we make of this African Atlantic world? The AU wants to create this global Africa, but it won't admit Haiti as a member. What does that mean when we see the world from an African Atlantic perspective? So these are really important hours, and the final hour is what the AU says it wants to do by 2063, which is to effect a renaissance. But there's a lot of work that we need to do before we get there. From my particular area of work, I want to ensure that our iconic heroes stop being displayed, are returned home, our cultural artifacts are returned back, so that we can use those as the Sankofa bird says, to look back, understand the genius of what we created through those artifacts, and then hopefully reconstruct a future. So I'll stop there, but for me the framework is a holistic one, which is to repair the damage of those 500 years and recover sovereignty and our dignity and build our futures. Thank you.
Education is preparation for reparations.